think we're set.
All right.
I'll let you.
I'll start off.
Okay.
In 1979, I joined the United States Agency for International Development and went to Washington. Found a place to stay and looked for a church. The Congregational Church was a long ways away from where I was living, so the next choice was a Methodist church, and I started going there to this Methodist church. And then within a few months, someone said, would you like to sing in the choir? So I did, and then there was this, I was a tenor, and then there was this young lady who was an alto, and the altos were below the tenors. So in fact, it was Mary Campbell, and I looked at the back of her head for about a year singing in the choir.
You left out the part about the visitor from Connecticut, though.
I don't remember what visitor from Connecticut.
And when you first came to Metropolitan, which was a huge church, a Gothic church there on Ward Circle in Washington, D.C., with a huge sanctuary. You know, Tracy comes from Falls Village, which is much smaller, and you, as you tell the story, you walked into that sanctuary and thought, well, this is much too big. Everything's happening about a half a mile away. But there was a visitor card that you were to fill out and put in the offering plate. And during the last hymn, the ushers would tabulate where the visitors came from. So at the end of the service, the minister says, we would like to welcome our visitor from Connecticut. There was only one, and Tracy said, oh my gosh, she's talking about me. This is not so big after all. And so that was an incentive to keep coming to this church. And that's where we met, singing in the choir.
The Christmas party for the choir in early January 1981, I got up enough nerve and I spoke to her.
Oh my goodness.
And I found out that she was the second of 6 children. This is after a year and a half of observing her. That she was the second of 6 children from a dairy farm in Illinois. I'm the second of 6 children from a dairy farm in Connecticut. And we both had shown animals at the fair and been in 4-H, and so we had a common communication, and within about 3 months we were married, right?
Yeah. So right after you got married, you went to Yemen, both of you together?
Yes, the proposal was to get married and go to Yemen. Well, by
Actually, I did that in 2 sentences. I asked her if she would marry me, and then the second sentence was, and go to Yemen.
But I had no idea where Yemen was, or what Yemen was like. I had to go to the library and do some research.
Joke from some British travel log or whatever was something about Yemen was, you know, it was rushing headlong out of the 14th century into the 15th century or something like that. There was almost no education, very few schools. Most of the people dressed in traditional dress and all carried a djembia, which is a curved knife on their belt. You must have seen some of those in pictures, and of course the knife is always there. Now if they draw it, they mean to use it, and so you wouldn't want that. Within the first month that we were there, we were in a hotel. No, or was it we finally had an apartment in September. And there was a lot of rifle firing one night. I had spent a number of years in Vietnam, so I was familiar with hearing ammunition and rifles and so on. And we got out of bed and jumped under the bed, slid under the bed to protect ourselves. And it just kept going on, and I figured that after a while it was pretty clear that it was outgoing and wasn't incoming. So we went back to bed. Well, the next morning we found out that it was, there had been an eclipse of the moon, So they all went out to fire at it. And of course, it worked. I mean, and then it came back.
I mean, in other posts that we've been to, we could interact with the local people more than we could in Yemen, because the language barrier in Yemen was formidable. We knew a little bit of Arabic. We had some Arabic training before we went, so I, at one point in my life, had kitchen and market Arabic. I could go and buy carrots and knew the numbers and the colors and the names of the fruits and vegetables and so forth. But to really interact with the local people was quite difficult.
Yemen was very tribal, and I expect still is quite tribal. And so different sheikhs would control different areas. The control of the central government sometimes didn't go very far beyond the main roads in the capital city. And so when you got stopped at a checkpoint, well, you could usually tell whether it was a government checkpoint or a rebel checkpoint, but you know, they were just looking at your papers or whatever. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Well, my role in Yemen, I taught school for a year at Sinai International School, but then gave that up after a year because our first child, John, was on the way. We did a lot of hiking in Yemen. There was it was a mountainous country with a lot of terraced farming and a lot of trails to and from the various villages up on the mountainsides. So we went hiking and, you know, carried John in this baby carrier, and the Yemeni were fascinated at this very fair-skinned, very light-headed American baby. We have some beautiful pictures of the Yemeni relating to John. And then, of course, it was not that long before Joseph was on the way, and before our end of our 5 years, we also had Catherine. Catherine was not born while we were in Yemen. She was on her way, but I came back to, it was the end of our tour in Yemen before Catherine was born.
So when we got ready to leave Yemen, I went around and made calls on the various ministries that I'd worked with. And I remember talking to the Deputy Minister of Agriculture, and he was the one that I'd interacted with most frequently. His name was Muqbil, Ahmed Muqbil. And I told Muqbil that I was leaving, but having been an agricultural officer, I was focused on production activities. And my personal production activity was very successful because I came as a newlywed and was leaving with 2 children and a third one on the way. And oh, he loved that. He loved that.
There were many jokes about sowing seeds.
He was so proud. I mean, he was as proud as I was.
But actually, Yemen is not our only Foreign Service post. We've been to...
Where did you go after Yemen?
Well, we were back in the States briefly, and then we went to Bamako, Mali, in West Africa.
There was an outbreak of desert locusts.
Desert locusts. The insects?
Every 7 years, you know, the Bible talks about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're still going on. It was a big deal, a big deal. They can go, they can travel as much as 1,000 miles in a week. And when they start to move, they go in swarms. And I remember in Mauritania, Nouakchott, when they were there, the desert locusts, they stripped all the trees in the ambassador's yard. We had emergency programs to try to take care of that, which was both insecticides and spraying, and they would have to have a contract with the helicopters to spray and so on. And we had a project called the Grasshopper Action Program or something like that. And so we had the cage in the office with some desert locusts. No, it was a grasshopper. No, it was the Adelia senegalensis, the grasshopper. Then they were also, anyway, we took to them home, and that was the first pets that our boys had. They made cages. Each had a grasshopper. That lasted for about a year, right? Until one of them forgot to bring enough leaves for the grass. Do you remember those?
I don't remember the grasshoppers as much as I remember Chester and Mindy.
Oh my gosh. Oh gosh.
Tracy's mother, Laura Atwood, wanted to come and visit the grandchildren for one Christmas when we were in Bamako. This was a major trip for her, but she persevered and came. And she, was the kind of grandmother who would have been content to stay in the house and play with the children. And she even asked me if there was some mending she could do. But we took her to a village just so she could see a bit of African life. We took her to our cook's village. We had a cook who was Malian but spoke French and was a very nice young man. And he invited us to go out to his village. And the chief of the village gave her as a gift a hen. And
No, it was a rooster first.
well, the rooster was first. I forget which came first, the hen or the rooster. But all right, a rooster came first. So a week or so later,
The whole idea was this was the best that they could do, and it was a very poor village. I mean, I remember the house was mud house, and about all they had in there was a cooking pot, and maybe one or two shirts hung on a nail. It was very poor, but they, a real gift.
American visitors, this is a real honor to them.
So the idea was, of course, they were giving us something that could be meat, sustenance. Well, we have 3 young children with us, and by the time we got back to Bamako, they'd already named the rooster Chester.
And if Chester's got a name, Chester's not going to end up in the pot.
So, all right, so then Mary's mother...
So then a few weeks later, my mother came to visit us in Bamako. But we went to the same village and they presented her with a hen, and on the way home the hen is named Mindy. And so we have Chester and Mindy walking around in our compound, our enclosed backyard, and...
Well, Mindy, of course, laid eggs, and Chester did his business and so on. And at one point we had 17 fowl running around.
We had quite a poultry project going just there in the backyard.
Well, finally, the landlord said, because he was a retired medical doctor who had worked in France, he was Malian, but he said, that's not very sanitary, having all these fowl running around, the yard, and I don't want that, and in fact, if you don't move them, I'm going to cancel the lease, and so on. All right, sir, all right. So we gave away the various chickens and so on, and to friends and neighbors and so on. But there was Chester. So we took Chester back to the village where he had come from. Well, they couldn't believe it. Because, of course, when Chester left the village, he was, like the village folks, pretty emaciated and not much meat on his bones and so on. And when he came back, he was a big plump rooster. I'm not sure what happened to Chester, but I can just imagine.
Yeah.
What else happened in Mali when we were there?
Well, we were there for the coup.
Yes. Musa Khalifa Traore, who had been the president of Mali since independence in '68, folks were a little, well, he was always elected every time there was an election, but there was only one political party and of course only one candidate. And it just was a question of whether he got 98 or 93% of the vote. And the people thought it would be time for a change, and they began demonstrating.
I mean, some of the markets that we had frequented were looted and burned, and it was quite a disruptive time. And the school was closed for a month or so.
And then you went to Kyrgyzstan.
Kyrgyzstan, yes.
Well, we were in Washington for quite a stint, and then we did go to Kyrgyzstan, yeah.
We spent a long time in Washington because I wanted the children to have all the sports teams and the music lessons and the Boy Scouts and things that aren't as well developed overseas as they might be. So we were in Washington, D.C. for most of their elementary years, and they went to the Washington Waldorf School, and I taught at the Waldorf School. But then when they were teenagers, we went to Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan was, I think, the best of our 3 foreign service posts. Being there with the children really helped us to meet the local people. We did far more interaction with the Russians and the Kyrgyz than we did certainly in Yemen and even in Mali. It was difficult to really befriend the local people. You knew your household help and so forth, but we began studying Russian as soon as we knew that this assignment was happening. I got a book of Russian phrases and so forth, and we began to learn some of the language, and the children did very well in the languages the whole time we were there.
The children decided to hike to the glacier. There's a national park about 30 miles outside of Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, Larcha, and you can go up to, there is a hut way up on the glacier. I don't know, it's probably 11 or 12,000 feet. It's, starting at maybe 5,000 or something. It's a long ways up, and it's not really a trail. It's just kind of, you go over rocks and scree and whatever. But the children wanted to do this, and so there's John, Joseph, and Catherine, and then their friend Medina. And so it was just after New Year's, right?
In January, yes.
So go ahead, Mary, tell the story.
Well, it's your story, you tell.
Well, they were going to do this, and they knew the route and so on, or had heard about it and so on from others, and they prepared, all right, and?
Well, they prepared, and it was a fairly mild January, so, we took them out there and hiked a little ways with them on the trail, and they took off, and all the time I'm thinking, well, just how cold does it get out here at night on these mountains? But, they'll be all right because they have a tent. And even though it's only a 2-person tent or something, they can all squeeze in this tent. And even if they can't get the tent pitched because it's too rocky, the windbreak of the nylon will protect them, and they'll have each other, and they're all Eagle Scouts and good kids. They'll be fine. And then we got home, and there on the floor of the bedroom is the tent. And then
They forgot to take
they
the
decided not to take the tent, that they would make it to the hut.
We were really worried, and so I got a video from the video library at the embassy. And what was it that we started?
Well, he said, let's take the mind off the situation, let's watch a video. So he puts on The Perfect Storm. This is where, all things come together and these fishermen are out on the water, and I mean, this was not the movie to be watching in that situation.
We didn't watch the whole thing, we just couldn't, we were too worried.
It was too worried, but Friday night we worried, and all day Saturday we hadn't heard otherwise, so we assumed they got to the hut and they were fine. And Sunday we drove out there and we hiked up the trail, and sure enough, here they came, singing songs. So we had a wonderful time. Their peanut butter froze.
They cooked some sort of noodles the first night, and it burned, and so of course they had to have this little stove to heat the snow in order to make water, and apparently they said heating the snow in the pot that had the burned noodles on the bottom, they said, was the worst water they'd ever had.
But they were fine, they had a good experience, and it all turned out well. What I remember about Kyrgyzstan is the interaction that we had with the local people. I mean, Catherine wanted to learn Kyrgyz, and so we found a young woman to teach her Kyrgyz. And this young woman, Nazgul, and her husband, Jumabai, invited us to their village, and we experienced the traditional company or holiday meal of the Kyrgyz. They slaughter a sheep and make what is called besh parmak, which is basically homemade noodles and mutton cooked together. And
They serve the head of the sheep.
They serve the head of the sheep, and you as the oxicol, the oldest male guest at this party, received the fat tail of the sheep. Is that right?
Yes. It was like, and as the honored guest, the elder male, respect. And so you get the important part of the sheep. Well, in that part of the country was the fat tail. The fat tail was like eating straight lard. I had 5 or 6 spoonfuls, maybe as many as 8 or 9, but then even the vodka didn't cut it.
There are many aspects of the Kyrgyz cuisine that were a real challenge to Americans. When they slaughtered a sheep, every part is used. They make the intestines into sausage and so forth, and the next morning for breakfast we had what Joseph called gut soup. It's very difficult to get some of these things down until you get used to them. You can acquire a taste for anything. And of course, another way they show their hospitality is when your plate is empty, they fill it up again. If your bowl of hummus is empty, they fill it up again, You work hard to get this down, and the result is it's full again. But we had wonderful experiences in Kyrgyz homes.
So in many ways, Eric, I would say that we were very lucky because we had an overseas experience in developing countries, and yet we knew that home was Falls Village. All right, always had a place to come back to, and it was basically in that overseas experience where we raised our grade school and teenage children. So in their formative years, they were into other cultures.